Hey guys, tonight we journey into a sun-baked battlefield where your enemies aren't soldiers or tanks. They're giant feathered birds. You're lacing up boots that crunch over cracked Australian soil, adjusting a clunky World War I helmet, and wondering if your biggest threat is heatstroke or an army of emus with nothing to lose. You can practically hear them already, the deep, booming thuds of their feet drumming through the wheat fields. You squint into the blinding sun, finger on the trigger of your Lewis machine gun, and think to yourself, this is not how I thought serving my country would go. And by the way, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Midnight in Manchester, 2 a.m. in Saskatchewan. I want to know. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 1932, and Australia is sweating. Not just from the heat, though that's part of it. The country's in the middle of the Great Depression, and things aren't looking good, especially not for veterans who've returned from World War I. They were promised land, but that land, way out in Western Australia, is stubborn and dry, and not exactly overflowing with prosperity. Still, you've been handed a plot and a plow, and that's supposed to be enough. Then, the emus arrive. At first, they're just dots on the horizon, hundreds of them, then thousands. You blink, thinking it's a mirage, but no. These birds are real, massive, and annoyingly fast. Each one stands up to 6 feet tall, with muscular legs like Olympic sprinters and a weirdly smug look in their beady little eyes. And now they're here, casually trampling your crops and wrecking your fences like they own the place. You try scaring them off, shouting, waving sticks. Nothing works. One farmer swears an emu looked him dead in the eye and then deliberately kicked over his water tank. The government, finally listening to the desperate calls of farmers like you, says, "Fine, we'll send the military." Enter Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery. He shows up with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The operation is strictly unofficial. They won't call it a war, but you're there, in the dust and the heat. And trust me, it feels like a war. The first engagement happens near Campion, where about 50 emus are spotted in the distance. You and the soldiers creep forward, guns loaded, tension building like it's a Western standoff. On the command, the machine gun bursts to life, but the emus scatter in all directions. They zig, they zag, they duck behind scrub and bush like they've rehearsed this. The soldiers only manage to kill a few before the rest vanish into the terrain, leaving behind churned-up dirt and a sense of failure. A few days later, you try again, with a truck-mounted gun this time. That's right. Someone thought putting a heavy machine gun on a flatbed truck would give you an edge. But the roads are terrible. The truck bounces like a trampoline, and the gunner can't aim properly. It's more slapstick comedy than military maneuver. One emu reportedly outruns the truck, like easily. You can't help but laugh, but it's the kind of laugh that teeters on the edge of despair. You signed up to defend the empire, maybe build a quiet life on some land. You did not sign up to be outsmarted by overgrown poultry. By the end of the first week, you've fired hundreds of rounds and killed maybe a few dozen birds. That's it. You hear stories from nearby fields, how the emus travel in packs, how they seem to post lookouts. One soldier swears he saw a lead emu scouting from a ridge, watching the humans fail again and again. Historians still argue whether these tactics were actual behavior or just desperate farmers projecting strategy onto chaos. Either way, the emus aren't backing down. A mainstream fact most people don't know. The Lewis gun, your main weapon, is a holdover from the trenches of World War I, meant to mow down enemy troops. Turns out, it's not great against emus, especially when they dart and weave like caffeinated greyhounds. Also, the birds are tougher than they look. Some keep running after taking multiple bullets. One particularly infamous emu gets hit, staggers, and keeps sprinting, apparently fueled by pure spite. After 2 weeks of this absurd battle, the operation is halted. The press gets wind of it, and headlines start to roll in. Military defeated by birds. Emus outgun army. It's humiliating. Politicians try to spin it, but honestly, you know the truth. You've seen the birds. You've watched them slip away time after time, silent and smug. You wake up in cold sweats to the distant thud, thud, thud of emu feet. And just when you think it's over, they come back. After intense pressure from farmers and more ruined wheat, the government restarts the mission. Round 2 of the Not a War begins. You go back into the field. This time, the troops are more cautious, picking off birds in smaller numbers. It works a bit better, but not much. In the end, only a few hundred emus are killed, and there are still thousands out there. A fringe detail, there's a suggestion from one desperate farmer to capture the emus and train them for military use. The idea never gets past the muttered stages, but for a brief moment, someone out there imagined emus with saddle packs and tiny helmets charging into battle for Australia. Makes you wonder what would have happened if someone had said yes. By late December, the operation is quietly shut down. You go home dusty, defeated, and completely unsure how to explain this to anyone who wasn't there. Emus won, humans 0. And yet, as ridiculous as it all sounds, it wasn't just funny. It was a real crisis. You lost crops, money, time. The whole region suffered. And now you have this weird story that no one will believe unless they've lived it. But even as the sun sets over those same empty wheat fields, you get the uneasy sense that somewhere out there, behind a patch of tall grass, an emu is still watching. You'd think that after such a surreal and publicly embarrassing episode, Australia would quietly file the Great Emu War under Things We Don't Talk About. But no, what happens instead is stranger. The story festers, grows legs, long, feathery ones, and begins to take on a life of its own. You're back on the farm now, hands calloused, watching wheat grow and wondering if the emus remember you. The government has called off the military for good, probably because every time a minister gets asked about it in Parliament, they look like they just bit into a lemon. But out in the West, folks don't forget. You've seen those giant birds watching from the ridge, still there, still smug. Back in Canberra, reports are written, filed away in dusty archives. One, hilariously, concludes that emus can face machine guns with invulnerability. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. Military officials quietly note that if war ever did break out again, like a real war, they would prefer the enemy not be feathered, flightless, and weirdly tactical. And here's the kicker. The government still refuses to call it a war. Officially, it was just an operation. But come on. 2 deployments, thousands of rounds fired, organized flanking attempts. It may not be in the history books as a war, but your sunburned skin and bruised ego would like to disagree. Meanwhile, the farmers are left to figure things out on their own. Fencing is too expensive, so some start lobbying for a bounty system. 1 shilling per dead emu. That actually kind of works. Over the next few years, tens of thousands of emus are killed, but not by soldiers with Lewis guns. Just scrappy farmers, gritty and underfunded, doing their best in a losing game of bird whack-a-mole. You might be wondering why the emus were there in the first place. Well, turns out they were just following instinct. Every year, after breeding season, emus migrate west in massive numbers, searching for food and water. And wouldn't you know it? Your nice, damp, carefully cultivated wheat fields are exactly what they're looking for. To them, your livelihood is a delicious all-you-can-eat buffet. To you, they're wingless menaces with dead eyes and a thirst for destruction. It's a classic case of tragic misunderstanding. They're not evil. They're just inconvenient. Now, here's something historians still argue about. Was the military really that incompetent? Or were they set up to fail from the start? Some researchers say the Lewis guns jammed constantly because of dust and heat, conditions that made success nearly impossible. Others argue that the soldiers just didn't understand their enemy. You don't march into emu territory with World War I tactics and expect to win. Still, others believe the government never expected success. They just wanted to be seen trying. Regardless, the story gets passed around, quietly at first, then more openly. It spreads beyond Australia, finding its way into strange corners of the world. It becomes the kind of tale you tell at dinner parties when the conversation needs spicing up. Did you know Australia once lost a war to birds? Cue laughter. Cue disbelief. But under the jokes, there's something poignant. This wasn't just a goofy bird blunder. It was born from desperation, by poor farmers abandoned by their government, by veterans trying to build a future out of nothing, by an ecosystem too vast and wild to ever truly tame. You look around your farmhouse and realize it's more quiet now. The birds still come, but in smaller groups. The bounty system, for all its messiness, has helped. Still, when the sun drops below the horizon and the wind picks up across the plains, sometimes you hear that soft, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of emu feet. And your hand twitches, remembering the trigger that never quite did its job. A quirky side note you hear years later from a neighbor. Apparently, some soldiers swore that emus would fake injuries. One bird would limp around, drawing attention, while the rest escaped. Now, whether that's real or just another farmer tale, you're not sure. But it wouldn't surprise you. These birds weren't just fast, they were weirdly clever. By the 1950s, the war has become legend. You see it mentioned in an article, then in a book. Decades later, some teenager on the internet turns it into a meme. And that's how the world finally learns about it. Not through your tired stories or dusty government files, but through pictures of angry birds photoshopped onto battlefields. In the 21st century, you'd think the story would fade. But no, it only gets bigger. You start seeing university professors citing it in lectures about military missteps. Documentaries get made. A video game mod even pops up where you can play as the emus. It's ridiculous, but somehow fitting. Because this isn't really a story about birds. It's a story about what happens when a country tries to control something it never really understood. About the collision between civilization and wilderness. And yes, about how sometimes you can do everything right. Aim true, fire bravely, follow orders, and still end up on the wrong side of history. Eventually, you leave the farm, sell the land, move to the city. But whenever someone asks where you're from, you can't help but smile. West Australia, you say. You ever hear about the Emu War? And they laugh. Of course they have. You nod slowly and add, I was there. Then you sit back, close your eyes, and wait for the inevitable question. Did the emus really win? and you just whisper, every single time. And now, as the dust settles across those empty wheat fields, and the last of the emu footsteps fade into the silence of memory, you can feel the stillness take hold. The chaos of battle, the rattle of old machine guns, the flurry of wings, it all drifts away like a dream you're slowly forgetting. You're back in bed now, tucked in gently under the soft weight of blankets. The fan hums like distant wind across the plains, steady and slow. The darkness around you is calm, like the quiet after a long storm. Sometimes the world surprises us, with its humor, with its absurdity, with the way it reminds us that we're never really in charge, not of nature, not of stories, not of how things are remembered. And maybe that's okay. You close your eyes and imagine those emus out there still, silent shadows under a full moon, moving in perfect sync, never rushed, never lost, just free. Let that image carry you into sleep, deep, quiet, and undisturbed. Good night.